Without a doubt, that phone call has put farther into the future a ceasefire because um, at this point in time, President Trump seems to be comfortable with the Putin position that the next step are these negotiations in Turkey. And we've seen what those negotiations in Turkey achieved last week. Like, yes, you did have the prisoner exchange. That was important, humanitarian gesture. But on the actual terms for establishing a ceasefire, it went nowhere. It was a step backward. And so, in a sense, President Trump has endorsed that step backward.
Well, 61% of Americans, according to a Harvard's Capps and Harris poll, suggest that they're unhappy with Trump's stance on Russia and Putin. And using your phrase from your last update that you wrote, I think it was published yesterday. Did Trump blink?
I think it's pretty clear, and I don't say that happily. And I have a lot of colleagues who think Trump's intention is to throw Ukraine to the Russian bear. I disagree with them. And I think that Trump has laid out a sensible approach, which I just described. But for some reason, he does not want to put pressure where pressure is required. And you also mentioned something else about trade. Uh, I was amazed, stupefied even, a month or so ago when the Trump administration announced their intention to have a quote unquote reset with Russia. Obama's weak and bad idea, which they've resurrected. Uh, we've not had the Obama reset was a failure, a geopolitical failure for the United States. And no American, excuse me, there's not been an American economic boon by investing in Russia at any time in history, including in the post Cold War period when a lot of American firms went in. And there's one more thing which is even crazier. Trump is right about how Biden weakened the United States with a clumsy energy policy, a green energy transition. And Trump wants to restore American energy, and he's been doing that. That's great. And he, as a candidate, criticized the Democrats for their weak policy on Nord Stream 2 before the Russian big invasion. Yet now Trump's team is talking about restoring Russian energy supplies to Europe as part of a deal after peace is achieved. Whose natural gas is not going to be sold in Europe if that happens? American natural gas. So American gas producers are livid about this. It's a bad idea from a geopolitical point of view, given what the Russians do with energy, and from an economic point of view. Completely incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that from an energy perspective, because also from a defense perspective, the US defense industrial base is a big defense industrial base, and NATO has relied on it to supply its ammunition, a lot of its weapons, and it's been sold around the world. But do you think some of the policies that have come out of the White House and the push to, I believe, rightly get Europe to stand up and take greater responsibility for its defense, but with some of the question marks that have been put around about US continuing support, is actually undermining the US defense industrial base when it comes to its export capability and giving an opportunity for European defense industry to step up and fill that void?
There's no doubt about what you've just said. Although I think that the administration is in a solid place now regarding NATO. There are occasional outbursts, but I think the policy is pretty sober and sound. But some of the things that President Trump has said, which criticize NATO, contribute to the problem you described. But he also said something very specific, which truly contributed to the problem you described. When he said, well, I don't know if we'll be sending our weapons to some of our NATO allies in the future because they may no longer be our allies. And given European nervousness about the restrictions on the current weapons we've provided to them, including their clear interest in sending those weapons to Ukraine, they're giving European leaders, as they bulk up on defense spending, a reason to put far more of their resources into their own defense industries. And that does cut against America's commercial / defense interests globally. So it's a mistake.
Yeah. So as we look back to President Trump and President Putin, who's playing whom? Is Putin playing Trump and stringing him along to avoid further wrath and to just try and extend the conflict? Or is Trump being very clever and playing Putin and backing him into a corner by suggesting that he's going to be on his side and give in to everything else, and then either get him to go to ceasefire talks or get him to a point where he's going to just go really hard on him?
We are in maybe the first act of what's supposed to be a multi-act drama of the Trump policy towards negotiating a peace, ending the war. At this point in time, just looking at the evidence, since we don't know what's ultimately in Trump's mind, on Trump's mind, Putin is playing Trump because it's been clear, even for people who need a great deal of evidence, it's been clear for the last 6 or 7 weeks that Russia has zero interest in a ceasefire. How many ceasefire proposals from the Trump administration has Ukraine accepted and Russia rejected? And Trump has taken criticism from his supporters. You mentioned that 61% of Americans, according to a poll, think Trump has been weak on Putin. That includes a fair number of Republicans, if you get 61%. Trump has been criticized for being weak on Russia by the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which is generally supportive of Trump's policy. The New York Post editorial page, ditto, very supportive of Trump. And even some Republican senators and Congress folks who do worry about being primaried have expressed some concern about this. So this is why Trump, for literally 6 weeks now, not every week, not every day of the week, but 3 or 4 times over this period, has said that maybe he's being played by Putin in the Kremlin, and he needs to do something about it. But while he's said it, he has only on one occasion and very quietly done it. That one occasion, and he deserves praise for this, around 3 weeks ago, around the signing of the critical minerals deal, he took 2 decisions to allow our allies and partners to send a modest amount of American weapons to Ukraine. That's the first time that President Trump in this term has allowed American weapons to go to Ukraine. Now, that opens the door. If Trump now were to announce, look, Mr. Putin, I see you haven't done much to establish a ceasefire. I'm going to agree now to an additional $2 billion of American weapons going to Ukraine. And if we haven't got this solved in another 4 weeks, it's going to be $10 billion. That would be a very serious form of pressure. We haven't seen that. I don't rule this out, but I don't know this is what's going to happen either.
So, going back to looking at things from a Putin perspective, it's clear that Zelensky maneuvered in this game of, we're probably 4D chess, if not 5D or 6D chess going on, maneuvered Putin into a difficult position by calling his bluff and Putin not turning up to the peace talks that he'd called in Turkey. But do you think Putin has managed to get to at least some point of resetting the game with this phone call that he's had with Trump? Or does he believe that, whether it's actual or not? Do you think he believes it?
Look, without a doubt, that phone call has put farther into the future a ceasefire. Because at this point in time, President Trump seems to be comfortable with the Putin position that the next step are these negotiations in Turkey. And we've seen what those negotiations in Turkey achieved last week. Yes, you did have the prisoner exchange. That was important, humanitarian gesture. But on the actual terms for establishing a ceasefire, it went nowhere. It was a step backward. And so in a sense, President Trump has endorsed that step backward. Because when Putin left the phone call with Trump, he immediately went on Russian TV and talked about those same diktat conditions that Medinsky, his negotiator in Istanbul, put on the table. Now, actually, there's one more important point, which you mentioned. Rubio saying he's now expecting the terms from Russia of conditions. That's a smart play. That's Rubio's efforts to get Russia to put something that's workable, or alternatively, which is, I think, what any sound analyst expects. If it's not acceptable, it's one more piece of evidence that the Kremlin's not interested, which hopefully then could lead to pressure from the world's still most powerful nation, the United States.
So, Ambassador, you're seeing a maturing of some of the key individuals in the administration as they're dealing with the complexities of trying to get a ceasefire and everything else. Do you want to give us some of your thoughts and insights?
I was impressed by the performance of Vice President Vance last week uh, in two ways. First, regarding Russia's aggression in Ukraine, Vance said publicly that, referring to the unsuccessful Istanbul talks relating to the ceasefire, he said the Russians are demanding too much. So basically saying what's very clear, that Russia is the problem in getting a ceasefire. But he did actually something last week which demonstrated substantial growth and a real achievement at the same time, not relating to the war in Europe, but relating to the confrontation between India and Pakistan. At the start of it, he said, well, there's really no U.S. role in this, which of course is wrong. But then we learned that he and Secretary of State Rubio were the guys working the phones to get the ceasefire. So Vance made a serious contribution, not just to U.S. security with that, but to global security, and in a way that was directly flew in the face of his initial reaction to the conflict, which demonstrates leadership and growth, and it's welcome to see.
Do you think he's been deliberately put in this position by President Trump to give him an apprenticeship to set him up to potentially be the next president?
That's, I think, a reasonable analysis. Uh, Vance is obviously a smart man, but although not very well schooled in national security policy. But this is a great way to learn it. And I think that may well be the president's intention.
Who's got the lead in the US administration, apart from the president? Of course, he's got the lead, but in dealing with Putin, dealing with Russia, dealing with Ukraine, because we seem to get Witkoff going in to see Putin and getting involved. We've got JD Vance, and traditionally, and I may be getting this wrong as a Brit, not understanding US politics, but the US vice president didn't always seem to get involved in the wider geopolitics. That was left to the Secretary of State. We've got Marco Rubio coming in. And I remember looking at the video of the ambush of Zelensky in the Oval Office, if I describe it that way. And it was JD Vance that took the lead, but Marco Rubio, sitting beside him on the sofa, was looking very uncomfortable indeed. Who's leading, or is it all three just trying to advise the president who's leading himself?
Look, roughly speaking, there are two camps around the president regarding the Russian war in Ukraine. One camp recognizes, as the Russian national security strategy says, that the United States is considered by Russia to be its principal adversary. And that group understands that what Russia's doing in Ukraine is very dangerous for American interests in Europe and globally. Then there's another group which appears to be clueless about the threat posed by Russian national security policy to the United States and Russia's aggression in Ukraine and Russians' ambitions to go beyond Ukraine if they succeed in taking effective political control in Ukraine. And they are, for their whole variety of reasons, which we don't have time to go into right now, willing to allow Putin to take control of Ukraine. And they don't understand that this would be not just a major geopolitical defeat for the United States, but it would make Trump look like a truly failed national security president. And I think Trump sort of gets that last part, sort of gets it.
Do you think if that happened, Xi Jinping would turn around and go, that's a green light to take Taiwan by force?
Well, green light is a bit too strong, but it would give him much incentive to do so. Now, I think there's a senior official at the Pentagon who has made his reputation in the last 2 years claiming the only real threat we face is China. Let Russia do what it wants in Eastern Europe. It's amazing that official, before he became an official, continued to utter that geopolitical naivete in the face of the fact that after he made that point, the leaders of Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, who have far more stakes in this than that official, said publicly the best way to deter Xi from moving on Taiwan is to defeat Putin in Ukraine. And those three states people were absolutely right. And that's basic geopolitics.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like to be amongst the first to get exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership at the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs or read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.